1. Every kind of depravity, conscious as well as unconscious. 2. The feeling of self-satisfaction from leading others astray. 3. The irresistible inclination to destroy the existence of other breathing creatures. 4. The urge to become free from the necessity of actualizing the being efforts demanded by nature. 5. The attempt by every kind of artificiality to conceal from others what in their opinion are one's physical defects. 6. The calm self-contentment in the use of what is not personally deserved. 7. The striving to be not what one is. This certain something, which arises in the presences of definite individuals owing to the enumerated Naluosnian impulses, besides being the cause of what are called serious retributive suffering consequences for these individuals themselves, also has the particularity that as soon as the action of what is called intense effort ceases in one of these individuals, the radiations proper to one or other of the aspects of the manifestations of this something have a greater effect on those around him and become a factor for engendering the same in them. In the common presence of every kind of three-brained being, there can arise, during the process of his planetary existence, 4 kinds of independent Hasnamas individuals. The first kind of Hasnamas individual is a three-brained being who, while acquiring in his common presence that something, still consists only of his planetary body, and who, during the process of his sacred Raskoarno, is subject to the corresponding consequences of the presence in him of the properties of this something, and is thus destroyed forever, such as he is. The second kind of Hasnamas individual is that Kesjan body of a three-brained being which is coated in his common presence, with the participation of that same something, and which, acquiring, as is proper to such a cosmic arising, the property of Turi-no-rino, that is, non-decomposition in any sphere of that planet on which he arose, has to exist by being formed again and again in a certain way, such as he is, until this certain something will have been eliminated from him. The third kind of Hasnamas individual is the highest being body or soul, during the coating of which, in the common presence of a three-brained being, this something arises and participates, and he also acquires the property of Turi-no-rino, but this time proper to this highest being body, that is to say, this arising is no longer subject to decomposition, not only in the spheres of that planet on which he had his arising, but also on all other spheres of the great universe. The fourth kind of Hasnamas individual is similar to the third, but with this difference, that the Hasnamas of the third kind has the possibility at some time succeeding in becoming, so to say, cleansed from this something, whereas for this fourth kind, such a possibility is lost forever. That is why this fourth kind of Hasnamas is called an eternal Hasnamas individual. For these 4 kinds of Hasnamas individuals, owing to their having in their presences this something, the mentioned retributive suffering consequences are various and correspond both to the nature of each kind as well as to what is called objective responsibilities ensuing from the primordial providence and hopes and expectations of our common Father concerning these cosmic actualizations. For the Hasnamas of the first kind, namely when this something is acquired by a being still consisting only of just a planetary body alone. The decomposition of this planetary body of his does not proceed according to the general rule, that is to say, the cessation of the functioning in his organism of every kind of sensed impulse does not proceed simultaneously with the approach of the sacred Raskuarno, that is, death. But the process of the sacred Raskuarno begins in him still during his planetary existence, and proceeds in parts, that is, one by one there gradually cease to participate in his common presence, the functioning of one or other of his separate independent spiritualized localizations, or as your favorites would say there, in such a being, first of all, one of his brains, with all its appertaining functions, dies. Later on, the second one dies, and only then does the final death of the being approach. In addition to this, after the final death, the disintegration of all the active elements of which the given planetary body was formed proceeds firstly much more slowly than usual, and secondly, with the inextinguishable action, only lessened in proportion to the volatilization of the active elements of the mentioned sensed impulses he had during life. For the second kind of Hasnamas individual, that is, when the Kesjan body of a three-brained being becomes such, the corresponding consequences are that such an indeed unfortunate arising, freed from the planetary body of a three-brained being, on the one hand not having the possibility of perfecting himself independently of and without a planetary coating, does not succeed in eliminating from his presence this maleficent something, even not always acquired by his own fault, which something is always and with everything in the universe an obstacle for the correct flowing of the common cosmic trogo-auto-egocratic process. On the other hand, owing to the property in him of turinurino, that is, not being subject to decomposition in any sphere of that solar system in which he is formed, he must inevitably be again coated in a planetary body, and in most cases with the exterior form of a being of one or two-brained system. And in view of the brevity, in general, of the duration of beings of these planetary forms, and also not having time to adapt himself to a single exterior form, he must constantly begin all over again in the form of another being of the planet, with the full uncertainty as to the result of this coating. And as regards the third kind of Hasnamas individual, namely when the highest being body of a three-brained being becomes such, and when this certain something participates in his coating in such a quality that he never loses the possibility of freeing himself from it, the matter is still more terrible, chiefly because he, as a higher cosmic arising, who, according to the foreseeing first-sourced principle of everything existing, was predetermined to serve the aim of helping the government of the whole increasing world, and on whom, from the moment of the completion of his formation, even when he was not yet perfected in reason, was placed the responsibility for every subjective voluntary as well as involuntary manifestation, has the possibility to succeed in eliminating from his presence this something, exclusively only by the action of the results of intentionally actualized particle duty, that is to say, of conscious labors and intentional sufferings. Hence, such a higher being body must inevitably always suffer correspondingly, having already acquired the gradation of what is called the degree of cognition of one's own individuality, until this certain something is entirely eradicated from his common presence. As a place for the suffering existence of such a high order of Hasnamas individuals, The higher sacred individuals are intentionally allotted from the totality of the large cosmic concentrations, 4 planets disharmonized in their subjective functioning, situated in various most remote corners of our great universe. One of these 4 disharmonized planets, called Eternal Retribution, is specially prepared for the eternal Hasnamas individuals, and the other 3 for those higher being bodies of Hasnamases, in whose common presences there is still the possibility of, at some time or other, eliminating from themselves the mentioned maleficent something. The 3 small planets exist under the names of 1. Remorse of conscience, 2. Repentance, 3. Self-reproach. Here it is interesting to notice that from among all the highest being bodies, which have been coated and perfected in every kind of exterior form of 3-brained being, there have so far reached the planet Retribution, from the whole universe, only 313, 2 of whom had their arising on your planet, and one of these is the highest being body of this Lentro Hamsanin. On that planet Retribution, these eternal Hasnamas individuals must constantly endure those incredible sufferings called Inkera Nudel, which are like the sufferings called remorse of conscience, but only much more painful. The chief torture of the state of these highest being bodies is that they must always experience these terrifying sufferings, fully conscious of the utter hopelessness of their cessation.